Thank you for this privilege and opportunity to be afforded an opportunity to reflect briefly on the life of this great man of God, Tata Edwin Teteleli Mahlutshana, as we commonly call him Ubot Edi. I really appreciate that privilege. He has been a very great, huge spiritual giant. And for me, young as I am, to reflect on that life, it is a bit too challenging. But I will do my best to share the little I've come to know about this great servant of God. But Eddie's life is a very rich, very deep life that has to be seen in its totality. And obviously, no one person can therefore give that very comprehensive picture of this great man. But I'll do my little bit. But perhaps before I zoom in on the area I want to focus on, let me just say briefly that Ubut Edi has been one of those whom Ubaba Ubengu had eyed and identified and released for a specific ministry. Ubaba Mahlutshana, Ubut Edi, falls into the category of some men and women who our late founder, Reverend N.B.H. Bengu, was identifying for specific ministries in the communities. Ubabu Bengu, because of the vision God had given him, he had realized that, his huge vision could not be delivered by one person. And therefore he needed as many hands as possible to be able to transmit that vision, to be able to carry that vision to those different sectors of the society. For example, if you look into evangelism, the crusades, revival crusades, he had some men and women he had anointed, he had blessed and released for that specific role. For example, abantu abanjengo Mfundisi Mashicila and many others across South Africa who were focusing on that specific ministry. He had, for example, people he had released specifically for youth development. I remember our first full-time youth organizer, the late Mfundisi Ndondo, who was the first youth organizer in the region, Yalapa Kuti Transkei, who was identified to focus on youth development within the church. Having said that, he also had other people. He had eyed other sectors that needed to be reached. And at his time, remember, when the gospel came into this part of the world, his vision was captured initially, and its impact yasebenza kakhulu kubantu at that time who, for lack of a better word, our parents who did not have much schooling, much formal education, but uThixo abamamkelayo wabasebenzisa bathi sa bangena kwindawo ngendawo. So I'm trying to reflect that uTata uMahlutshana was one of those who was identified and therefore assigned ukuba yena he must focus on reaching the youth in the schools, on reaching the youth esikolweni, ayofika nevangeli ayokushumayela. Ngoba uTata wayazi uMfundisi uBhengu ukuthi yena eyedwa could not reach all these places, and therefore wamnyula ke ubawo uMahlutshana, wambekela ukuba wama-accredita, wabekwa wavezwa kubefundisi kumhlangano in the 70s abefundisi behlangene apha eMthatha kwaMamutshafta. Umfundisi uBhengu wamphakamisa uTata Mahlutshana njengemuntu amthumela as an accredited minister to as an accredited minister missionary ezawungena yoshumayela ezikolweni, wamnika i-credentials zoba umfundisi angene as a missionary to the schools. That is then how his ministry began. Wathandazelwa ke, wabeka izandla, he was therefore released. That is therefore the genesis and the origins and the beginnings of his ministry. Now, having said that, there were others, like I've said, later on, for example, to go and preach to the teachers about ezikolweni, obawo omacingwana, and many others. I may not have all the names, but there were various people ababebekiwe, oTata uGila, i-teachers zasengcobo ezindala, oba uSomana, ababekwayo babona bathi take the baton bayibalekisele ezikolweni kootitshala. So that's how broad, that's how huge Nicholas Bhengu's vision was. UTata Mahlutshana wanika uxanduva loba balekele ezikolweni. That is the mission and the mandate our embracer with his full hands, and he ran so loyal, so faithful to that mandate. The mandate ka ahambe nayo leyo, like in the days of Noah, when Noah released that dove from the ark, that dove went out and ran with its mission until that dove came back with a leaf to reveal ukuthi uqhubeka ntoni ngaphandle. So the sign of the soil, the son of Nicholas Bhengu, Uba Mahlutshana, was very active in that ministry, in that he operated in that space with the blessing, with the anointing kamfundisi uBhengu. Remember at that time ukuthi inkonzo sentshilo i-Assemblies of God yayingenabantu abaninzi abafundileyo. So but 80 was one therefore of the few, if you like, who then became that asset in that sense, because benesikolo bekwazi ke ngoku bakwazi bawufikela kwindawo where some of our own parents had limitations. That was uMahlutshana. But I want to focus with ministry yakhe, the role he played in developing the youth within the church. We were privileged as the young people of the church. Tina ke besine, we got, if you like, a double portion of his ministry, because besimfumana ezikolweni where besifunda khona as high school as university. We got a huge portion of his ministry. And I'm saying double portion because when we came back from school, ezinkonzweni zethu, on our Thursday services, on our monthly meetings, on our quarterly conventions, and so forth, Baba uMahlutshana uButi was there to nurture us, esifundisa, esibonisa uthini ukhonza uThixo ongumuntu omtsha. But having said that, xa iTranskei iphuma, remember ekuqaleni the whole Cape was one entity, was one region. There was one Cape youth. But after the independence of Transkei, then the Transkei now had to stand on its own. Yane youth committee zayo, youth conventions zayo, and uButi noTata uManquku were the pioneers zomsebenzi kaThixo in that area. Awusebenzayo ke esezikomitini noTata uSokutu beququzela kwi-youth ministry during the time likaMfundisi uBhengu. Those are the great men esifunde kubo, salandela kubo ukukhonza uThixo singabantu abatsha enkonzweni. Now waphuma ke engena ezinkonzweni zethu, emabandleni ethu, esifundisa singabantu abatsha, kodwa simazi ukuthi actively yena usezikolweni, but within the church he was available as a member, esebenza as speaker, as one of our speakers now and again, addressing us, addressing various themes and topics. That is then ubut-80 within the church. And above everything else, more than the preaching, esifunde kuye, he was a man of the word, a servant of the word. Ubut-80, he was an epitome, an embodiment, a reflection yento beyishumayela. I-values ne-standards ze-gospel kaMfundisi uBhengu wazibamba so closely and so tenaciously. Safunda ke ezo zinto kuba how do you conduct yourself, how do you carry yourself. Now ubut-80, one thing strange about him, there was no audience that was ibimbida. You take him to an audience of our rural parents, emakhaya, ezilalini, he would fit in perfectly well. You take him to an audience, yet traditional leaders, ezinkosini, he would fit in very well. Different audiences, audience of civil servants, he would fit in very well. With students at high school, tertiary, academics, he fits in very well. That is the kind of anointing this man of God had. Wabelonsikelelo ke kubantu abatsha. So i-role yakhe ne-contribution yakhe within the youth, it's so immense. He was a forerunner in laying the foundations zomsebenzi wabantu abatsha, not only in the Cape region, but also specifically in the Transkei region. And more specifically, xa ke ngoku i-youth organization in an arm ekuthiwa education board. He was a member of the education board, ewayikuyo, eququzela kuyo, engu-chairman wayo, ephethe i-education board for a number of years. Waqhubeka nayo, even when that committee amalungu amanye aye aphela ngabikho, kwashiyeka mbalwa, he will continue eku-education board. No Miss Dlulani, the late Miss Dlulani, babe ngabantu babuphethe umsebenzi kaThixo sijonge kubo. But there's another angle that I want to talk about with Minister ubut-80, because he was strategically positioned, within the high offices of the then Transkei government, in the office of the Prime Minister. That strategic position, which he effectively used to advance the cause of the gospel. Now within the church, ube asset because njengoba ekula position njena edilishana nenkosi, for example, usincedile ke enkonzweni because i-access yongena ezinkosini njengamanje bomfundisi uBhengu, in his strategic vision, he would assign specific people for certain roles. For example, abantu abanje kutata uqhina ngabantu esasibazi babeke uluba badilishane nenkosi, and ungena kwezinkosi linking with these traditional leaders. Utata uMahlutshana played a very important role. Edibanisa abefundisi bethu ngapha, abambe inkonzo ngapha, abambe abefundisi ngapha, abambe inkosi, abambe nohulumente. So he had that strategic role. Enkonzweni yethu, he also played a role because nguye kumfundisi uqhina babe noxanduva ke ababelunikiwe lokujongana nemihlaba nabanye kabutata besebenzisana nabo benoxanduva benekuxanduva notata uSothobe, the late Dr. Sothobe, besiphethe umfundisi uBhengu ebanika uxanduva babujongane ne-issues of the land, the sites of the church, and so forth and so forth. This is another huge contribution he played. Usincedile kakhulu ke, sifunde kakhulu kuye, senditshilo ube yilo facilitator, ube ngulo muntu kohlanganisayo kakhulu, sithembele ngaye. Akukho into ezixingileyo emabandleni, we knew ukuthi umuntu who can unlock those access to government will be ubut-80. This has been a true son of Nicholas Bhengu, very true son, as I've said, who truly embodied the high standards of Bhengu's vision, of Bhengu's gospel. He demonstrated those. Messages zakhe were not about anything else, about the message of the cross. He was so faithful to that message until the end of his life. Now, he never minced his words. Tata Mahlutshana iqonga. He doesn't play dice. He doesn't play games. He will deliver. And at the end of it, everyone around will know what kind of response I will need to do, because his message was very clear nokuthi what kind of response is necessary. This is the blessing uThixo asiphiwa nakwa-Assemblies of God. Wahamba ke eyilo ambassador ye-Assemblies of God, eyilo ambassador kaMfundisi uBhengu, in penetrating through the different circles, as I've mentioned earlier. We will truly miss him. To be honest, I am not so sure. I don't know who can rise to the occasion. I'm not sure who will fill in those big shoes. But we trust uThixo mhle ukuthi he will raise men and women, even in our own time, who will take the baton, beaten from where he left it, and move along. We count on his prayers. We count on his teachings. We count on his lifestyle, asibonisa yona, what it means ukuphilela uThixo. This was a true son of Nicholas Bhengu. I must conclude by saying, what I particularly liked from him, it is his consistency. Consistency. Utata uMahlutshana wathetha into enye from the beginning until the end. He never changed his narrative. He never changed his story. He never became an enemy of what he had initially went out. He preached that message right through consistently until the end of his departure. And for this, we salute his God. For this, we honor him. Sithi ngalo mazwi, hamba kakuhle bawucwaneni. Farewell, servant of the living God. Usishiya ke in the midst of this pandemic. We don't know what tomorrow holds for us, but we count on the God osinika yena. What tomorrow holds for us in this country, in this land, we don't know. But one thing we know, the God osinika yena, he is a living God. He won't leave us. I pray that God will bless your kids, God will bless your family. Thank you for sharing your life. Thank you for being who you are. Above all, thank you for being a true ambassador of Nicholas Bhengu. We salute you. Sleep well. See you in the morning.